It was 6:00 p.m. on June 6th, 1944. A train from Budapest creaked to a halt inside the vast compound of Auschwitz. Its metal frame groaned like a dying animal. The moment the door slid open, a storm of noise erupted: cries, questions, children clinging to mothers, men staring blankly ahead, women grasping bundles of clothes and old family photos. No one knew where they were. Not exactly, but the smoke told them it was nowhere good. The smoke, it stung the eyes, smelled unnatural like oil, like burning something. Behind it, faint but unmistakable, was the scent of ash. 16-year-old Lukach stepped out onto the gravel with his father, Sandor. Just yesterday, they were in their apartment in Budapest. Sandor was a pharmacist, respected. Lukach was in school, bright-eyed, quick-footed. They lived a normal life, or so they thought. But now, with only a cloth bag between them, they stood at the gates of the most terrifying industrial machine the world has ever known. And Lukach was about to lose everything. What happens when a society trades humanity for ideology, when science is used not to heal, but to dissect and destroy? Auschwitz was not just a camp, it was a blueprint of human evil, manufactured with precision. What follows is not fiction. Even if Lukach never lived, 1,000 others did. Their stories run like blood through the rails of Birkenau. And this is one of them. The rail cars arrived day after day. By 1944, the Nazi regime had streamlined death into a schedule. Auschwitz-Birkenau, or Auschwitz II, became the heart of it all, spanning over 140 hectares. The complex was divided into 3 primary sections. Auschwitz-I, the original camp built in 1940 for Polish political prisoners. Auschwitz-II-Birkenau, a massive extermination and labor camp. Auschwitz-III Monowitz, an industrial factory site exploiting slave labor for the German war machine. As Lukach and his father were herded onto the platform, they were caught in a moment of engineered terror, a moment that thousands before them had faced and thousands after would not survive. The selection line, an SS Dr. Cold. Clinical stood at the fork. A tilt of his hand would send you left or right. Left meant labor, right meant death. Most arrivals never made it beyond this decision. 80% of the deported Jews, Romani, and others were murdered within hours of arrival. Lukach had seen rumors, heard stories from whispering neighbors in Budapest. None of it prepared him for this. Not the shouts, not the rifles, not the haunting silence of people who had already given up hope before stepping off the train. To his left, a neighbor misses. Kovacs was pushed aside, her weak limbs unable to argue. Tomas, his friend from school, gave him one last glance before being ushered into the other line. The wrong line. Then came Lukach's turn. The doctor eyed them, calculated. 2 bodies, one strong, one older. The hand tilted left. Lukach and his father were marked for labor. But what they didn't know was that the labor camp had its own rhythm of death. Slower, perhaps, but no less cruel. They were marched to the sauna not for rest, but for erasure. Inside, their names were replaced by numbers, their hair shaved, their clothing taken. Lukach felt the cold blade glide across his scalp like winter wind. Then came the branding, a needle, a number. He was no longer Lukach. He was prisoner number 824,731. That night, they were crammed into barracks, Wooden bunks stacked 3 high, no matrices. No warmth. The air stank of rot, sweat, and slow decay. A man coughed somewhere in the dark. Someone wept. Someone else muttered prayers to a god they feared had left. This was BIEB, the sector assigned for Jewish male laborers, just meters away. Women, children, and the Romani were segregated into other wooden blocks BII. BIIE organized with cold bureaucratic precision. Each prisoner wore a triangle, a color-coded like products in a warehouse. Yellow for Jews, red for political prisoners, green for criminals, pink for homosexuals, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, brown for Romani. Identity was simplified. Humanity discarded. At dawn, the rain came, cold and silent. Outside, roll call was held on muddy ground. Lukach's shoes were already soaked. A man collapsed in front of him. No one moved. Not a blink. Not a gasp. Silence was survival. An SS guard made a note. Then came a prisoner with an armband, a capo. He dragged the man's body away like a sack of coal. Lukach realized this was his new reality. Don't speak. Don't stumble. Don't fall. By midday, he was assigned to Monowitz, Auschwitz III, an industrial compound built for one purpose: to fuel Germany's war machine. The IG Farben factory complex towered over the camp, churning smoke and swallowing lives. It was here that synthetic rubber buna was produced, along with fuel and explosives. Work was brutal. 6 hours straight of lifting, hauling, stocking no breaks, no excuses. He lifted a bag too slowly once, and a guard lashed him across the face. The factory didn't just drain the body, it broke the mind. Lukach counted seconds just to keep his thoughts from drifting into despair. But what struck him most wasn't the labor. It was the music. As he crossed a yard between buildings, he heard it. A flute, delicate and pure. He turned and saw a group of women prisoners forming an orchestra under guard orders. One girl caught his eye. She smiled through the filth. Lukach smiled back. For a moment, he was 16 again. During a short break at Monowitz, Lukach overheard 2 older prisoners whispering behind a stack of crates. One of them pointed toward the main hospital complex near the original camp. His voice lowered when he said the name. Mengele, Josef Mengele, the angel of death. To Lukach. That name meant little, but the look in the prisoner's eyes said enough. His hands trembled as he described what he'd seen. Children with matching faces, twins locked in sterile rooms. Some had fevers. Others had bandages wrapped tight around their limbs. Many never walked again. The experiments were worse than the stories. Mengele would infect one twin with disease, then compare the progression with the other. If one died, the other was killed, dissected with cold indifference. Some were blinded with chemicals, others sewn together. Why? Because in Mengele's twisted mind, understanding racial purity justified any cruelty. Lukach was silent. A had no siblings, but he had seen little boys separated from their mothers just days ago. He began to understand what fate awaited them. Back at Monowitz, the labor never ceased. By mid-July, the sun scorched overhead. Sweat burned the eyes, and prisoners collapsed more frequently. Lukach's bones ached. His hands bled. One afternoon, the grip on a heavy bag slipped from his fingers. It hit the ground with a dull crack. A guard screamed. Lukach didn't react in time. The beating was quick, ruthless. a boot to the ribs, a blow to the back of his head. When it ended, he lay curled in the dust, wheezing, blood mixed with dirt in his mouth. He couldn't cry. Tears were a luxury, long forgotten. When he finally limped back to his barrack, the sun was already sinking. There were 300 barracks at Birkenau, split by identity and purpose. Some were for Romani, some for Jews, some, darkly, were only temporary stops before extermination. As he shuffled through the rows of buildings, Lukach scanned each door. He was looking for his father. And then, in the fading light, he saw a figure slumped beside the bunk. Sandor, his father's face was swollen. Blood streaked his cheek. He didn't speak. Lukach dropped beside him, holding him up. Sandor had been assigned to rail work. That morning, someone tried to escape a doomed act. The prisoner was shot immediately. The rest of the work group, punished by association, were beaten without pause. Lukach helped his father lie down, then ran across the muddy camp to the kitchens, just a few wooden structures manned by emaciated prisoners who had learned to cook with almost nothing. He begged for food and came back with 2 crusts of bread and a half-spoiled sausage. It was enough. For now, that night, after ensuring his father was breathing steadily, Lukach noticed something in the far corner of the barracks. Movement. A group of men crouched together on the dirt floor, whispering. He moved closer. They weren't praying. They weren't conspiring. They were playing chess. The pieces were carved from bits of wood, some barely more than splinters. The board was scratched into the ground uneven, crude, but real. One of the players noticed him. "Come," he said softly. "Sit." Lukach hesitated, then obeyed. The game unfolded like a miracle. For a few minutes, the camp disappeared. No fences, no smoke, no hunger, only kings and queens, moves and countermoves. Here, strategy mattered more than strength. Here, men were not prisoners. They were opponents, equals. Lukach played his first match under the flickering yellow of a storm lantern. He smiled for the first time in weeks, and he returned every night after that. Chess became his defiance. By August 1944, the tide of war had shifted. The Red Army was advancing from the east, reclaiming towns and villages at a staggering pace. Within just 2 months, Soviet forces had recovered nearly 100,000 square kilometers of territory. The Nazis felt the pressure. Inside the camps, conditions worsened, food grew scarcer, beatings more frequent, executions became a daily occurrence. On the 1st of August, 1944, Lukach awoke to see his father still lying on his side, barely conscious. His lips were cracked, his eyes glazed over. He could not rise for roll call. A guard shouted. No response. The guard stepped forward, gun drawn, ready to beat. Sandor trembled, tried to lift himself, and staggered onto one knee. It wasn't enough. The guard gave a signal. 2 SS men approached. Lukach froze. He couldn't speak. He couldn't move. His father, the man who once read him bedtime stories, who filled their Budapest home with the smell of medicine and lavender, was dragged away toward crematorium 2. Lukach followed at a distance, hiding between rows of barracks. He saw the building from afar. It looked like any other, long, gray, silent, but it was a lie. Inside was a gas chamber, windowless, cold, lined with steel mesh columns from floor to ceiling. Through those columns, Zyklon B, a cyanide-based pesticide, would be dropped. Within minutes, the room would fill with invisible poison. No screams, just silence. Then another door, the crematorium, furnaces fired by human fat, thousands burned every day, every single day. On that day, Sandor burned too. The skies began to change over Auschwitz by the end of 1944. You could not hear it, but something was moving. Beyond the wire, the German army, once feared across continents, was in full retreat. The Soviet Red Army had pushed through Belarus, Poland, and the Baltics. Soviet soldiers were liberating towns, cities, and other concentration camps abandoned in haste by the SS. But inside Auschwitz, the nightmare didn't end. It mutated. The guards grew more violent, more paranoid. Transports increased. Food nearly vanished. The orchestra stopped playing. The chess game stopped too. Lukach no longer looked forward to nightfall. The stars above him no longer looked like hope. They looked like holes in the sky. In January 1945, word came from the guards. The camp was to be evacuated. In reality, it was a death march. Thousands of prisoners thin as skeletons, many without proper shoes. Some with open wounds were forced to march westward, away from the advancing Soviet lines. Lukach was among them. He didn't know where they were going. He just walked. Through snow, through ice, through the black forest of Poland, the white roads of Silesia. A man beside him fell on the second day. A shot. Another fell on the third. A shot. Some survivors later said it was 250 miles. Others never lived to say anything. By the 27th of January, Soviet troops reached Auschwitz. They found less than 8,000 prisoners still alive. The rest had been marched away. What the Red Army discovered inside shocked even hardened soldiers. Warehouses full of shoes, human hair, spectacles, prosthetic limbs, mountains of baby clothes, bones in ash pits, journals, letters, photographs, frozen in time, and the gas chambers, 4 of them, still intact. One Soviet soldier said it felt like walking through a machine built for killing thought and hope and memory. A factory of oblivion. Lukach was still walking, each step like dragging steel. His boots had long since torn, his skin cracked, frostbitten, gray, his thoughts scattered, broken. He remembered Budapest, his father's hands, his schoolteacher's chalkboard, the chessboard in the dirt. He wanted to go home. He wanted to survive. But that winter, one of the coldest on record, took more than frostbite. It took resolve. On a nameless roadside somewhere between Gluwice and Buchenwald, Lukach collapsed. His knees buckled, face first, into the snow. A guard shouted, "Aufstehen! Get up!" Lukach didn't move. The shout came again. No response. Then, a shot. It echoed across the white field and vanished into the trees. Lukach and his father were never real. But everything that happened to them was, from the moment the trains pulled into Auschwitz, the Nazi regime calculated life by labor, death by number, and pain by the pound. Between May 1940 and January 1945, over 1 million people were deported to Auschwitz. At least 900,000 of them were murdered immediately after arrival. The rest worked to death, tortured, or left to rot in freezing barracks. built not for shelter, but for slow decay. Prisoners were gassed in crematoria disguised as shower blocks. Children were mutilated in the name of science. Men and women were marked not by crimes, but by birth, race, and belief. Auschwitz-Birkenau is a place where the earth itself refuses to forget. The soil beneath those tracks holds more human ash than topsoil. The walls of the barracks remember screams. The chimneys now crumbling once spat out history's greatest shame into the air. And somewhere in that soil, symbolically or otherwise, lies Lukach. So what now? What do we do? With all this knowledge, we remember, but we also question, how did a modern society educated, scientific, cultured, build death into an industry? How did doctors abandon healing? How did musicians play while murder happened yards away? And more importantly, what signs do we ignore today that once echoed faintly, like footsteps on frozen gravel? Evil rarely begins with violence. It begins with categories, with the labeling of people, with silence, with jokes, with excuses. The Holocaust did not erupt from chaos. It was constructed vote by vote, law by law, lie by lie, and if it was built once, it can be built again. Unless we refuse, unless we remember Lukach and the millions like him, not just as victims, but as warnings. This has been a production of Legacy Files. If you found this story valuable, subscribe to our channel to explore more untold truths and silent legacies. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about the tracks we choose to follow next. When Soviet soldiers entered Auschwitz on the 27th of January, 1945, they found survivors too weak to move, too hollow to speak. Many lay on straw mats. Some clung to tin bowls, still hoping for soup. Others simply stared through them as if the human part had long since fled. Among those survivors were children. Over 200 of them, all of them marked. Their arms bore inked numbers, some too large for their tiny frames. A few were orphans. Many had been subjected to Mengele's experiments. Some had matching scars, not from accidents, but from deliberate cuts, symmetrical incisions where data had once been collected. One of these survivors, Eva Moses Kor, I would go on to speak before classrooms, world leaders, and fellow survivors. She described how Mengele infected her twin with disease while injecting her with unknown substances. Just to watch the difference in outcome, I should have died. She once said, but the moment I survived, the moment I lived, I became something he could never destroy. Another, Primo Levi, an Italian chemist, would write, "If this is a man," a haunting meditation on the moral erosion in the camps. He asked not how people died, but how they lived under such conditions, how men could become beasts, how fear replaced thought. The survivors didn't all tell the same story, but they shared one common message. Silence kills. Forgetfulness kills. The Holocaust was not just a crime against Jews, Roma, Poles, and others. It was a crime against truth. After the liberation of Auschwitz, the world saw the photographs, the corpses, the piles of shoes, the ovens, and yet it took years for justice to catch up. Many of the SS officers who worked at Auschwitz escaped justice for decades. Some lived quietly in South America under assumed names. Others reintegrated into post-war German society. Joseph Mengele fled to Argentina and later Brazil. He lived under aliases, practiced medicine in secret, and reportedly drowned in 1979. His remains were not confirmed until years later. At the Nuremberg trials, several architects of the Holocaust were sentenced, but Auschwitz itself, that symbol of industrial death, did not stand trial. It stood as a ruin, a museum, a cautionary monument. Poland turned the remains into a memorial site in 1947. Today, more than 2 million people visit Auschwitz each year. They walk beneath the iron sign, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. And they leave knowing it was a lie. Few records survive the gas chambers. The Nazis destroyed most evidence in their final weeks. But some testimonies remain buried in ash, preserved in hidden scrolls, or spoken by the few who lived to remember. These records tell us Zyklon B was initially a pesticide used to disinfect barracks. The SS adapted it for mass killing by observing its effects on Soviet POWs. Gas chambers at Birkenau could kill 2,000 people in less than 30 minutes. 4 crematoria operated around the clock during the summer of 1944. Between May and July of that year, when Lukach arrived, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. Most were murdered within days. That operation was so vast, so ruthless, that Allied reconnaissance planes photographed the camp's expansion from the air, and still, no bombs were dropped on the tracks. What does it mean to be 824,731? To be given a number instead of a name? It means you are not a person. You are a statistic, an entry, a worker, a corpse. But that number stamped into flesh speaks louder than words ever can. Because history cannot ignore what was written on skin, Lukach's number is fictional. But Elie Wiesel had one, so did Simon Wiesenthal. So did millions more. And when their voices falter, it is that number that echoes, not as identity, but as indictment. Auschwitz did not end in 1945. Its echoes lived on through Cold War politics, revisionist denials, and even in modern hate speech that still circulates in whispers and online forums. In recent years, anti-Semitism has risen across multiple continents. Books have been banned, swastikas drawn on synagogues. Young people, some born decades after the war, have asked if it ever really happened. And so we tell Lukach's story, not because he was real, but because he could have been, because he stands for the unnamed. Because the moment we stop telling these stories, the tracks will begin again, not with trains, but with ideas, with divisions, with labels, and those, as history shows, are far harder to dismantle than fences.